Let me read something to you slowly, carefully, because this is not gossip. This is not internet noise. This is the kind of thing that makes people who have lived long enough stop and say, wait a minute, something here does not add up. A woman known online as Surprise Witness put out a statement that struck a nerve. And when you've lived through decades of scandals, cover-ups, broken institutions, and powerful men escaping accountability, you start to recognize patterns. You don't jump to conclusions, but you don't ignore red flags either. She said, in essence, that Tyrone Blackburn appeared less like a champion for justice and more like a distraction, an operation, an agent of chaos. Someone who steps into cases that matter deeply to victims, and somehow, mysteriously, those cases stall, collapse, or disintegrate. And when you've been around long enough, you know this feeling. That uncomfortable feeling where something looks official, but feels wrong. Now let me be very clear here. This is opinion, theory, and observation. But it is grounded in a pattern that keeps repeating. Because ask yourself this. How does a lawyer who claims to be fighting powerful celebrities end up sabotaging nearly every case he touches? How does someone present themselves as the hero, the defender of the little guy, while judges repeatedly reprimand them, deadlines are missed, filings are sloppy, and cases that should move forward instead go nowhere? And most importantly, who benefits when justice is delayed long enough that people give up? For those of you watching who are 65 and older, you already know the answer. Justice delayed is justice denied. Let's talk about what has actually happened. Tyrone Blackburn was involved in multiple high-profile civil cases connected to powerful names. Some of these cases involved serious accusations, not tabloid nonsense, but allegations that deserve to be handled with professionalism, care, and integrity. Instead, what we saw were poorly constructed lawsuits, sensational headlines that drew attention away from stronger claims, and repeated procedural mistakes that handed the defense exactly what they needed: plausible deniability and grounds for dismissal. That is not how a careful, ethical attorney operates. Now, one case in particular, the case involving Lil Rodney, had actually reached discovery. A judge had advanced certain elements. Progress was being made. Accountability felt possible. And then suddenly, everything slowed down. Why? Because the attorney at the center of it all could no longer legally continue. And when a lawyer collapses, the case collapses with them. Victims are left scrambling. Time passes. Evidence gets harder to use. Momentum dies. And that is when people start asking the question that no one wants to say out loud. Was this incompetence, or was it intentional? Because here's what doesn't sit right. This same lawyer was publicly reprimanded for allegedly using artificial intelligence tools improperly in legal filings, after being explicitly warned not to. Judges called him out. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. He allegedly misrepresented work. He allegedly failed clients. He allegedly crossed ethical lines that any lawyer with training knows are career-ending mistakes. And then there was the incident involving a process server. Something so serious, so reckless, that it defies logic. Ask yourself, especially if you're someone who grew up respecting institutions, why would a trained attorney risk disbarment so casually? Why would someone destroy their own career unless they believed they no longer needed it? That's the question no one wants to answer. And this is where the theory comes in. What if these lawyers are not meant to win? What if they are meant to stall? What if they are meant to absorb cases, create noise, dominate headlines, give victims hope, and then quietly sabotage progress from the inside? Because if you're a powerful man facing dozens of civil lawsuits, you don't need to stop people from filing. You just need to make sure those filings never go anywhere. And for someone sitting behind bars, still surrounded by money, influence, and loyal intermediaries, that is not impossible. Advanced payments, quiet arrangements, plausible distance. A lawyer who was previously unknown suddenly gets attention, media appearances, and access, while delivering no real results. And the clients? They are left with false hope. False hope is one of the cruelest things you can give someone who has already been hurt. This is not about politics. This is not about fandom. This is about whether the justice system is being quietly manipulated, not by judges, but by people pretending to fight on the right side. And for those of you who are older, who believed in the rule of law, who taught your children to trust institutions, this hits differently. Because it feels like betrayal. And this is only the beginning. For those of you who have lived long enough to remember when a lawyer's word meant something, when courtrooms were places of seriousness and dignity, what we are witnessing right now should trouble you deeply. Because there is something far more dangerous than silence. It is noise. Noise that looks like action. Noise that feels like progress. Noise that keeps the public distracted while nothing meaningful actually happens. And this is where we must talk about the illusion of justice, the performance of accountability without the substance. Let's take a step back and breathe for a moment. If you've reached the later chapters of life, you know this truth. Real justice is slow, quiet, and disciplined. It does not shout. It does not seek attention. It does not rush to cameras before it files motions. So when we suddenly see lawyers popping up everywhere, television interviews, viral headlines, dramatic claims, it should make you pause. Because serious legal work is not done on cable news. And yet, that is exactly what we saw. One lawyer after another stepping forward, presenting themselves as champions, talking about explosive evidence, shocking tapes, earth-shattering revelations, all while the actual cases behind the scenes went nowhere. Take the situation involving another attorney often discussed alongside Tyrone Blackburn. The public was told there were recordings, that there was proof being circulated, that Hollywood was buzzing, that consequences were coming. And for a moment, it felt like the walls were finally closing in. But then silence. No filings. No courtroom movement. No measurable progress. Just interviews. And for people who have lived through decades of political scandals, corporate cover-ups, and broken promises, you recognize this tactic immediately. If something is real, it does not need to be marketed. So ask yourself this, and I want you to really think about it. Why would an attorney with truly devastating evidence rush to television instead of rushing to court? Why announce strategy publicly when doing so only benefits the defense? Why turn legal claims into entertainment? The answer is uncomfortable. Because the goal may not be justice. The goal may be distraction. Let's be honest, many of these lawyers were not well known before these cases. They were not household names. They were not commanding high fees or national attention. Suddenly they had both. And when attention becomes the reward, accountability becomes optional. Now let's return to the clients, the people who matter. These are not wealthy individuals with teams of advisors. These are people who trusted the legal system. People who came forward believing that telling the truth would matter. And instead, their cases became vehicles for someone else's spotlight. Missed deadlines, sloppy filings, judges openly expressing frustration. Procedural mistakes that any competent attorney knows can doom a case. These are not small errors. These are fatal errors. And again, we must ask the question that no one wants to ask. How does this keep happening? Because once is a mistake, twice is concerning. But over and over again, across multiple cases, with similar outcomes, that is a pattern, and patterns don't lie. Now think about who benefits from this chaos. When lawsuits are poorly drafted, defense teams smile. When claims are exaggerated publicly but weak legally, credibility collapses. When lawyers become the story instead of the evidence, judges grow impatient. And when time passes, memories fade, witnesses disengage, and public outrage cools. That is not accidental. For those of you who raised families, worked hard, and believed in consequences, this is painful to watch. Because what we are seeing is not the failure of victims, it is the failure of representation. And failure is being rewarded with fame. That should alarm everyone, especially those who understand that integrity is built quietly over decades and destroyed loudly in moments of greed. Now let's talk about something even more troubling. Why would a lawyer knowingly risk disbarment? Why ignore direct warnings from judges? Why continue questionable practices even after being called out? Why would someone with a future to protect behave as if the future no longer matters? Unless they already got what they came for. An advance, a payoff, a guarantee that winning no longer matters. Because if your role is not to succeed but to stall, then disbarment is not a failure. It's the exit strategy. And the victims? They are left behind, forced to start over, re-traumatized, and running out of time. That is why this matters. This is not internet drama. This is about whether justice is being quietly neutralized by people wearing the right titles, but serving the wrong interests. And for those of you who have lived long enough to know better, you can feel it. Something is very wrong. And in part 3, we are going to confront the hardest truth of all. Power does not disappear just because someone is behind bars. And sometimes, the most dangerous moves are made when the public thinks the story is over. By the time you reach this stage of life, you've learned a truth that younger generations are still struggling to understand. Power does not disappear when someone is removed from public view. It adapts. It hides. It reroutes. Many people believe that once a powerful figure is jailed, sued, or publicly disgraced, the story ends there. But history tells us otherwise. Those who have lived through political scandals, corporate collapses, and financial crimes know this lesson well. When money, loyalty, and fear are already in place, physical absence means very little. And that is why this conversation matters so deeply. Because what we are witnessing is not chaos, it is managed disorder. Let's talk plainly. A man with immense wealth and decades of influence does not suddenly become powerless because he is locked behind a door. The networks remain. The intermediaries remain. The incentives remain. And most importantly, the motivation remains. Civil lawsuits are dangerous not because of headlines, but because of discovery. Because once documents are requested, once testimony is compelled, once timelines are examined, stories collapse. So if you cannot stop lawsuits from being filed, the next best strategy is to ensure they never reach that stage. And that does not require illegal interference with courts. It requires something far simpler: compromised representation. Lawyers who appear to fight but quietly fail. Lawyers who generate attention instead of results. Lawyers who keep cases alive just long enough to exhaust their clients. That is how influence protects itself. Now let's look at the behavior that keeps raising alarm bells. A trained attorney understands one thing above all else. Honesty to the court is non-negotiable. Judges can forgive mistakes. They can allow corrections. They can extend deadlines. But they do not tolerate dishonesty. And yet, we saw repeated accusations of misrepresentation. Continued behavior after warnings. Decisions that defy professional survival instincts. To those of you who spent your lives in careers where reputation meant everything, this is incomprehensible. Why would anyone throw away their license? Unless the license no longer mattered. Unless the real reward came before the consequences. This is not about one lawyer. This is about a systemic vulnerability. Because when lawyers become celebrities, they stop serving clients and start serving narratives. When they give interviews before filing motions, they are not building cases. They are building personas. And personas do not win in court. But they can delay. They can confuse. They can misdirect public attention. Now consider the timing. Multiple cases suddenly slow or stall. Clients must scramble for new representation. Momentum is lost. Negotiations quietly replace depositions. And all of this happens while the public is still distracted by headlines, debates, and online arguments. That is how accountability slips away, not in dramatic escapes, but in quiet exhaustion. For those of you watching who remember when wrongdoing carried consequences, this feels deeply unsettling, because it suggests that justice is not being denied openly. It is being starved, and starvation is harder to detect. Now let's talk about something painful. False hope. False hope is worse than rejection. False hope keeps people waiting. False hope drains time, energy, and trust. False hope convinces people to stay silent just a little longer. And when that hope collapses, what remains is despair. That is what happens when clients are represented by chaos instead of competence. That is what happens when lawyers are agents of confusion rather than advocates for truth. And this is why people are beginning to wake up. Other commentators, other observers, other citizens who are paying attention to court records instead of headlines. They are noticing the same thing. The same names, the same patterns, the same outcomes. And that is when the illusion starts to crack. Because no matter how powerful someone is, they cannot control perception forever. Eventually, people ask the question, who is really working for whom? And once that question is asked, the game changes. In part 4, we are going to bring this to its conclusion. We will talk about responsibility, about what accountability still looks like, and about why awareness, especially from those who have lived long enough to see history repeat itself, matters more now than ever. If you have lived long enough, you know this truth in your bones. Nothing collapses overnight. Not empires. Not reputations. Not systems built on money and silence. They collapse slowly, through exposure, fatigue, and awakening. And that is where we are now. Because what people are beginning to understand is not just that certain cases have stalled, but why they have stalled. Not because the truth disappeared, but because the pathway to justice was deliberately obstructed. And obstruction does not always come from the outside. Sometimes it comes wearing the face of help. Let us return to the idea that keeps surfacing again and again: false hope. False hope is telling a victim, "We're working on it," while nothing moves. False hope is promising accountability while missing deadlines. False hope is giving interviews instead of filing motions. And false hope is devastating, especially to those who already waited years to be heard. For many of these clients, time was not just a legal issue, it was personal, emotional, psychological. And when their cases stalled, they did not just lose momentum. They lost faith. Now think about what happens next. Clients must start over, find new lawyers, relive trauma, explain everything again. And all the while the clock keeps ticking. This is not incompetence. This is cruelty disguised as chaos. And that is why people are finally asking the hard questions, not emotionally but soberly. Why did these lawyers insert themselves into so many high-profile cases? Why did the same mistakes repeat? Why did judges repeatedly express frustration? Why did outcomes consistently favor delay over progress? And most importantly, who benefited? Because it was not the clients. It was not the public. And it certainly was not justice. What we are witnessing now is not a collapse, it is an exposure. Bar associations are being notified. Judges are documenting concerns. Patterns are being recorded. And once something is on record, it does not disappear. This is where many people misunderstand accountability. They think justice always arrives loudly, with headlines, arrests, and spectacle. But often justice arrives quietly, through professional consequences, through loss of credibility, through the slow erosion of trust. And for those who orchestrated chaos believing it would protect them forever, that is the miscalculation. Because while noise distracts the public temporarily, records remain. And the people watching most closely are not internet commentators. They are judges. They are regulators. They are legal professionals who understand that integrity is the backbone of the system. And once it fractures, everything built on it is vulnerable. For those of you in your later years who believed in fairness, who taught your children right from wrong, who lived by the idea that actions have consequences, your instincts are correct. Something has been wrong. And now, slowly, others are seeing it too. This is not about revenge. This is not about outrage. This is about clarity. Clarity that chaos is not accidental. Clarity that distraction is a tactic. Clarity that justice requires competence, not performance. And clarity that power is never absolute. It only survives as long as people stop paying attention. So keep watching, keep questioning, and do not confuse loud promises with quiet action. Because the truth does not need a microphone. It only needs time.